Welcome to the Success Series podcast, brought to you by the Presto Post. This show is all about the secrets, recipes, and philosophies of some of the world's most famous people, be them composers, actors, actresses, entrepreneurs, authors, painters, investors, philosophers, journalists, scientists, you name it. Each episode features one person, and typically 7 to 10 separate pieces of advice. These podcasts are not done by us, however. What we do instead is comb the internet platforms for any recordings and audio clips that already exist, study them, and then separate the wheat from the chaff. These podcasts are the wheat, or as we like to call them, nutritious audio snacks. The golden number is 7. This is the number of lessons we try to fit into each podcast, but inevitably we struggle to keep within that number. Sometimes there is just too much to cram into 7, that we have no choice but to include 10 or more. Besides, are not rules made to be broken? And seeing as we created that rule in the first place, well... Anyway, on to the show. On today's show we have Lin-Manuel Miranda. Miranda is an American composer, lyricist, singer, playwright and actor. He's perhaps best known for creating and starring in the Broadway musicals Hamilton and In the Heights. He also co-wrote the soundtracks of Disney's Moana and will star in their upcoming film Poppins Returns. Miranda's resume is beyond impressive. He has on his shelves a Pulitzer Prize, 2 Grammy Awards, 3 Tony Awards, a MacArthur Fellowship, and an Emmy Award. He has quite a vibrant, zestful, lively persona, which comes across in his many interviews, and of course, in his work. In those interviews, he is thankfully never reluctant to give advice, to share his philosophies, and the lessons he's learned in his colourful but still embryonic career. So with that, we give you 7 lessons from Lin-Manuel Miranda. 1. There are going to be times when you feel like giving up. When it feels like it's too hard, or even impossible. When it seems like you're going nowhere, and your motivation is low. This is the grind, and it is what separates the doers from the don'ters. All creatives go through this, all of the time, but especially when the project is something long or against the grain. As was the case with Lin-Manuel when he wrote Hamilton, which took him 6 years of ups and downs. This is where discipline is really important. It is the difference between the dreamers and the achievers. It is what moves you closer, that little bit closer, every day. You have to be disciplined, which means saying no, not only to yourself, when you want to give up or just procrastinate, but to friends, to family, and to all other potential distractions.
It took you 6 years to write Hamilton, but I know we, as teenagers, if we're writing an essay, and we have trouble, we're like, oh my God, I just want to give up. Did you ever feel like that?
All the time. All the time. And then you push through it. You push through it, because what's the alternative? You're going to leave that idea stuck in your head forever? That sucks. The alternative is you go through life and you had this great idea and nothing came of it because you got tired. And yeah, sometimes you don't go to the party that all your friends are at because the idea is calling to you in that moment. Wait for It's a great example of that. I was on my way to my friend's birthday party when that lyric showed up, when death doesn't discriminate showed up in my head. The idea came on the A down. I started writing it down in the train, in La Quinita of the A train. Breakdancers are dancing, I have my headphones on. I get out, the whole chorus comes all at once. I write it down, and I suddenly see the shape of the whole song. I was just like, the chorus is Burr, that's who he is. I go into my friend's party. I go, hey, what's up, man? Happy birthday. I gotta go. I get on the L train, and I write the rest of the song on the way back home, from the L to the A back up to 207th Street. You have to do that sometimes. You have to say no to your friends to say yes to your work. Because what are you gonna do? Lose that idea because you decided to have a drink with your friends? It's not worth it. Your friend will be there.
2. If you're trying to do something, by definition, you're going to stand out, which means that you're going to be criticised. Even if you do everything correct and to the best of your ability, criticism cannot be avoided. This goes back to the myth of perfection, that says that every being on the planet has a range of different preferences, tastes and dislikes, and so though it may not be impossible for an extremely large majority to be pleased. For example, who doesn't like the taste of bacon? Or who isn't pleased when they win the lottery? Or who isn't pleased when they fall in love? Or who doesn't enjoy making babies? Anyway, the chances of it being a particular person or creation or business is almost entirely implausible. The point is, if you're not willing or able to be criticised, then you shouldn't try to stand out. This is a very bad philosophy, but it does highlight a very important point. Being able to take criticism is an essential part of walking the creative path, and in fact, most other paths in life. But not only this, you must also be able to utilise criticism, wherever it is fired from. Withstanding it is one thing, and it is a skill that must be learnt. But once you can withstand it, you must use critique as fuel. How? A couple of ways. Firstly, by filtering the bad from the good. Most criticism is simply not worthy of addressing, either because it's from angry hobos, bankers, or people who just don't understand your work. But some of it will show you exactly where your weak spots are, and how you can and should improve. It will also give you a good idea of the kind of people you and your work connects with. In fact, in this sense, even the hobos and bankers may have something to offer to you. The second way is to simply channel any anger and frustration that you have at unjust criticism into concentration, focus, fire. You can use it as a way to stand out even more.
Yes, the answer is yes. You always get a lot of rejection. Anytime you're going to put something new into the world, there's a million people who will tell you how they've done it better before, or how that's already been done, or how it's not going to work. And you have to look at those as motivators. Just like if you're going into acting, you can't look at auditioning as a way of getting a job. You have to look at auditioning as the job, because that's what you're going to spend the majority of your time doing. And if you love it, getting the job is gravy. So sure, the trickiest thing is continuing to work. And I was very lucky with Heights that I had Tommy Kail, because I had someone who wasn't me saying, bring in something Friday. Bring in something on Friday. This is good, this part feels weird. Bring in another song on Friday every week for 8 years.
3. You may have to cross, and even walk along, many different paths before finding the one that you like. What this means for creative people is trying your hand at different types of expressions, subjects, and playing ball in a few different domains. Finding your voice, standing out, establishing your niche, making your stamp, getting yourself recognised, even knowing who you are and what you are interested in. All these things take time. Finding the right path is a never-ending process.
What do you tell others who want to do what you do?
Start writing now. I tell them to start writing now. It takes a long time to find your own voice. It takes a lot of reading things you love and seeing things you love, and reading things you hate and seeing things you hate. I think the beginning of your work as an artist, I think it begins when you imbibe art and you're able to critically say why you love something or why you don't love something, why something doesn't work for you. In doing so, you figure out your own tastes and you figure out the kind of work you want to make. And so I think in the early stage of everyone's work, you're chasing your heroes. You're chasing the literary styles of your heroes, the themes that your heroes explore because they're the ones that resonate with you. And in falling short of those and in chasing, you eventually stumble into what you sound like and what the kind of art you create. I can point fingers at Jonathan Larson, and I can point fingers at Sondheim and Kander, and so many artists in the musical theater realm, but also hip-hop artists like Big Pun and Biggie, whose focus on storytelling and the rhyme schemes within their storytelling made me want to be a better lyricist. And so, you chase those and you fall short until you become yourself.
Creativity manifests itself in a variety of different forms. You've got the obsessive iterative, you've got the obsessive, iterative and experimentational type, the stream of consciousness, expression type, and the type that comes out of collaboration and conversation. There is also the type that comes about when you're not thinking, when you're in the shower, playing with your children, or cooking, a type of spontaneous creativity that apparently comes from nowhere. Of course, It doesn't come from nowhere. You've been thinking about it all along, subconsciously.
While I want to get as much done in the time I have on this earth as anybody else, I also am very zen about the fact that, you know, there are going to be things I write that people love. There are going to be things I write that people hate. With Hamilton, I knew I was doing my best work. I knew I was doing everything I knew about musical theater and everything I knew about hip hop and throwing them in the same pot and seeing what kind of paella I'd make. I didn't know whether it would be a success or not, but I was like, this is going to be tasty. I don't know if anyone else is going to like it, but I like it. So you kind of have to satisfy that first, and then, you know, the rest is out of your hands.
5. There are lessons to be learned everywhere in life, from every person, experiment, every film, book, tragedy, conversation, from every situation. Despite this fact, there are 2 big problems that get in the way of learning. First, many people are not very open-minded, and mostly subconsciously. That is, they don't make conscious attempts to draw lessons from their experiences. For example, they watch movies and read books and have conversations without ever trying to learn. Second, how many people actually live fully? Sadly, not many. Most people are too tired, stressed, worked up, and just busy to widen their experience, to get uncomfortable, to try new things. Yes, people are too busy to think, too busy to live. Whilst this may be the life some people want to live, for the creative personality, it is death. To make art, to become a colourful and creative thinker, to even just learn how to live properly, you need to expose yourself to hundreds of different ideas, beliefs, viewpoints and subjects. And you do this with books, movies, people, conversations, plays, paintings, music, sport, and all of the forms of expression that you both like and don't like. You think about why it is that you like this and like that, disagree with this person, and like that piece of musical theatre, and don't like this one, and so on and so on. This is how you get better, day by day, month by month, year by year. What makes this so hard, though, is how easy it is to get caught up. One way to tackle this is by, as Montaigne said, keeping the taste of death in your mouth. For death reminds you to live.
With all of the good and bad that comes with the world, the brilliance of writing your way out of your circumstances, but also not knowing how to let something slide once you're in that position. I feel like a mosquito that hit an artery. Like, I don't know how to wrestle it all to the stage. And Tom Weidman wrote the book To Assassins, Pacific Overtures. He's amazing at wrestling history to the stage. And the advice he gave me which was so great, and I've been trying to follow it, is write the songs that demand to be written. Write from your gut what parts of the story are aching to be told musically, and that's going to form a spine. It will form a central spine on its own because your interest in this guy and what you choose to write will form its own sort of narrative, and that's been working pretty well so far. So you have to say, I'm learning something from this. This is something I love, so that even if you can't control whether it succeeds or it fails. That's out of your hands. Forget pretending you can control that. What you do with your time is the most important thing. So you can only write what matters to you. That's the only gut check you can do, and then you hope other people respond. Listen, this show ain't medicine. It's not like you take a hit of Hamilton and you start making good decisions. Would that it were. It's a show. It's a musical. It's not going to cure your hiccups, and it's not going to cure your rash. It's an evening of entertainment. But what I think it does across the board, and I know this from the 3 a.m. emails I get from the friends who have seen it, is because Hamilton did so much in his short time on Earth, it forces you to reckon with what you're doing with your time. The last questions of the song the last words of the show are time and who tells your story, who lives, who dies, who tells your story. And so you leave the theater wondering, who tells my story? And that's always a good perspective to have, I think. I think we get so caught up in the day-to-day of living that it's, Thornton Wilder taught it to us in our town. How many of us really experience life while we're living it? And I think the takeaway from Hamilton is a bracing reminder to do that. I I think Hamilton was ready to die from the time he was 14 years old. I think what he has is what I have, which is that thing of tomorrow's not promised. I got to get as much done as I can. So I think he had this curious fascination with, an obsession with death, because he saw it at such a young age. His mother died in bed next to him. They both got sick. She never got better. So what does that do to you? What does that do to your psyche?
What does it do to you?
What does it do to me?
Yes.
Well, it makes me think that my main character's got, he sees death everywhere. I know I do.
That's my point.
Yeah.
You just said to me that what he had in him, I have in me.
Yeah.
Do it. Do it.
Do it. Yeah. But, and we can say, well, yes, but we get things done and we still have to plan for, next week. Hamilton had an appointment on the books that day that he went to that duel in the morning. He still was going to have lunch that day. Yeah. He didn't know he was going to, a part of him thought he might die that morning, but he also had plans, And that's how we all live.
To live a great life, you must be prepared to fail, sure, and to die maybe as well.
Yeah, and that's why the things that are the scariest to us are those seeds we plant that might outlive us. Having children, getting married, you're putting into the world things that you might not live out to see. And it's so scary, but it's also so hopeful.
Number 6, learn to tell stories and tell them well. Music, theatre, film, books, comedy, art, they're all about story. There are not many great storytellers. The ones that are great, however, usually go places. You must also not compromise. This means taking your time. Storytelling, like most others, is a skill that takes time to build and get right.
I'm out of college, I'm 23 years old, and Tommy Kail and I are meeting with a veteran theater producer. To pay rent, I am a professional substitute teacher at my old high school. Tommy is Audra McDonald's assistant. Tommy is directing in the Heights, and with his genius brain in my corner, my 80-minute one act is now 2 acts. This big deal theater producer has seen a reading we put on in the basement of the Drama Bookshop in Midtown Manhattan, and he is giving us his thoughts. We hang on his every word. This is a big deal theater producer, and we are kids desperate to get our show on. We are discussing the character of Nina Rosario, home from her first year at Stanford, the first in her family to go to college. The big deal theater producer says, now, I know in your version, Nina's coming home with a secret from her parents. She's lost her scholarship. The song is great, the actress is great. What I'm bumping up against, fellas, is that this doesn't feel high stakes enough. Scholarship, big deal. What if she's pregnant? What if her boyfriend at school hit her? What if she got caught with drugs? It doesn't have to be any of those things. You're the writer. But do you see what I'm getting at, guys? A way to ramp up the stakes of your story? I resist the urge to crack my shoulder. We get through the meeting, and Tommy and I, again alone, look at each other. He knows what I'm gonna say before I say it. Pregnant, I know. Nina on drugs, I was there. But he wants to put our show up. Tommy looks at me. That's not the story you want to tell, and that's not the show I want to direct. There are ways to raise the stakes that are not that. We'll just keep working. If I could get in a time machine and watch any point in my life, it would be this moment. The moment where Tommy Kail looked at uncertain, frazzled me, desperate for a production and a life in this business, tempted, and said no for us. I keep subbing, he continues working for Audra. We keep working on In the Heights for 5 years until we find the right producers in Jill Furman and Kevin McCullum and Jeffrey Seller. Until Philly native Kiara Hudis becomes my co-writer and reframes our show around a community instead of a love triangle. Until Alex Lacamoire and Bill Sherman take my songs and make them come to life through their orchestrations. It will be another 5 years before Heights reaches Broadway, exactly as we intended it.
So I heard Peter Sellers, the great stage director, opera director, tell a group of Harvard students once, you will never see the world more clearly than you see it right now. What would you say to young artists looking at the current political moment and searching for ways to create the next generation of Pulitzer-worthy work?
That is the question, right? May you live in interesting times. Boy, do we live in interesting times. For me, it always gets back to story. And I think if you set out to say, I'm going to write a poem about the injustice of voter fraud. I'm going to write a musical about voter fraud and rigged elections, and I'm telling you, it's going to be boring. It's going to be boring because you're starting with theme instead of with story. I fell in love with Hamilton's story, and in chasing his story, it allowed me to write about all these other themes because they're inherent in his life. The notion of power, the notion of the immigrant narrative, and how immigrant has positive connotations in our society just as often as has negative connotations in our society. There are the notions of who gets to make the decisions in our country and the limits of representational democracy. If I set out to write a show about that, it would be so boring. But if I'm writing about Hamilton and his friend Burr, and Burr gets locked out of a dinner, suddenly we can talk about all that stuff, and it's exciting because the personal is political. So I would tell the storytellers living in these incredibly interesting times, find the story that moves you and changes you and allows you to see differing perspectives. Because if the story is compelling, we'll go with you regardless of what the politics inherent are. I believe your responsibility as a storyteller, especially in the theater, is to give people the time of their lives and tell a great story well. Everything else is gravy.
Finally, and quite appropriately, number 7 is about turning off. Turning off is as important as turning on. In other words, rest.
When you get a good role, I'm not tired of playing Hamilton. I mess up in a new place every night. I get one certain part better than I've ever gotten it every night. I think I will be revisiting it for the rest of my life. But it's no accident the best idea I ever had happened on vacation. So that's important too, as Ariana Huffington knows. Resting is just as important. And I always knew I'd do a year. I did a year when I was in the Heights. And so I'm just kind of, that's my capacity. And then I can let other ideas into my brain.
If you like this podcast and would like to see more of them, there are many ways you can support it. You can leave a review on iTunes, on our website, or anywhere else the podcast appears. You can share it with friends on social media or on your own blog or podcast. You can talk about it over breakfast pancakes, paleo pancakes, of course. You can purchase any books you recommend on the site using the hyperlinks, which will take you straight to Amazon. Or you can support us directly with a donation. You can do that at pressthepost.org/support. As always, thank you for listening.